All right. Excellent. Welcome, Bella. Nice to see you.
Just a day
My name's
later, right?
John. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm very excited to be meeting you here with Bella Crystal to discuss the current sun and lunar transits that are going on and how they are illuminating the shadow frequencies that we may be experiencing. So, let's go ahead and dive right on in. Last night, we had a very potent super pink moon lunar alchemy session with a special guest, Bella. Um, I'd love to hear some of your reflections about what we were able to cover and work with last night, or any thoughts that you have about what we did look at and what's going on now.
Yeah, I was happy to be part of the new moon or the full moon because you have done those transmissions by yourself. And I really felt like that that alchemized something for me to actually include the moon in the lunar alchemy, of course, And yeah, I do feel like there is always something, and I guess this is how I work as a 4/6. When we do something with people and then we kind of just go in and we do it, we do it from having been with people, and then we go and do it in our little group. There's a part of me that gets sad that only so many people get to be part of the transmission. So yesterday when we were with everybody all the time, there was this expansive feeling for me that everybody was in, and just noticing how I work. And if it was for me, I would include everybody all the time, and of course the world doesn't really work like that, but I could see that in myself. And I feel also that the full moon in Scorpio is one of the most powerful moons, and with that position that was going on, so even hearing myself speaking to it and then being able to just relax and listen to Simone and listen to you, that was powerful because it really kind of took us in that process where we began together and continued and finished together.
Mm. Yeah, that makes me think about, we were, while we didn't specifically focus on it the entire time, we were looking at gene key 27, which is where the sun was moving through, and it's kind of its final transit, the last day of its transit in that particular gate. And a lot of what was coming up around that was the kind of the movements of life, where we have an in breath and an out breath. And that interestingly led into the individual specific expression that each person has as a reflection of not only what's going on outside of them, but as a contribution through that through that particular gateway that we were looking at. And when you're speaking, I think about the specific kind of light that you have to share, which is so incredibly inclusive of so many people, and how that individual role that you have serves to relate with the collective. And while that's, I mean, it's always interesting for each person to focus on, well, what is my role and everything. The the point that I'm looking at, or the idea that I'm looking at, I'm a 6-2, so I'm always sort of like looking at the big picture of everything. It's that every individual has a very specific role to play in relationship with the collective. And even for those of you that may be watching that know you carry the archetype of the hermit, which I do, which seems as if you may withdraw from the energies of interaction with the collective. There's still a very important role to play in that process. And I can only kind of imagine what role this process of lunar alchemy is is serving in the relationship for each person to engage their own role and contribute to the collective evolution. So I was very happy to see that last night was it just felt like a really powerful and transformative session. And I think that even tonight, there's a huge potential for the same, just because of where we are in the current transit. We're coming to the cusp of one of the quarters. There's a lot of stuff going on. So Bella, I'd love to dive into your perspective on everything that's happening with the sun and the moon, the earth, where we are cosmically speaking.
Yeah, let's look at the chart.
Oh,
So
let me get you set up there. There you go. I think I may have found the button that will just set you up that way, but I'm not quite sure. We're going to have to do some testing.
okay. So yeah, it's already, we can see that tension that was there yesterday when we were looking at, we had the earth, the sun on this side, and then the earth and the moon together on the other side. Like that already, the tension that was there, I feel like I look at the chart now and it's not the same tension. We do still have the reflector chart where nothing is defined by the planets. There is no channel that is activated. So everything has this reflective energy, and the moon is still in Scorpio. So there is some intensity there. What I feel right now, and what we are speaking about today, is that we just have the sun that went into the 24th in the first line. And we have Uranus hanging out here for 7 years in Taurus. And Uranus is all about the unexpected, is all about kind of the explosive. So really Taurus, it's not really the best sign for Uranus to be in. And right now the sun, once a year, the sun is coming here for 7 years, illuminating that Uranus in Taurus. So there is something really powerful right now with the inventor, this archetype of being able to bring an inspiration in and making some sense of it, rationalization or returning. What I feel for the 24 is that at the end of the day, it's about returning home, returning into sovereignty, using the mind, not as being, in control of it, not as being slave under it, but using it as a kind of a container where inspiration comes in. But the whole way of coming in is to actually bring it down into the body, into embodiment, and coming home, returning over and over again. And this is also when the mind distracts us here or to the future, to the past, or what we always want to do is to come back to stillness, come back home. So returning, which is the name of the I Ching, or one of the interpretations or translation of the I Ching, returning, for me, it's not this rationalization where the head goes or the mind goes over and over and over. It's much more coming back into stillness, coming back home over and over again, whenever the mind is pulling us, distracting us from the here and now.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the I Ching, the 24th hexagram is seen as the turning point. And it's this point of total stillness where it's possible for light to suddenly re-emerge, to come forth again. And when we think about, well, how does that really relate to me in terms of being in my body? Well, it's that moment between the breath where, if you're really closely paying attention to the flow of the air as it comes in and flows out of your lungs, you can sense there's a moment of stillness available in between the activity that's happening, this sort of activity of the body that you really can't turn off. Sure, you can hold your breath for some time, but eventually the next breath is going to occur. And in between those breaths, that stillness between the activity, there's a limitless amount of possibility. And that really opens the door for the mind, as you were suggesting, Bella, to begin to create new things, to begin to project or manifest or attract or magnetize new possibilities into existence. And I think that a lot of the focus in meditation practices on the breath is partly to bring our awareness to that moment of stillness, as that moment is the possibility for your humanity to come forth, for your life force to come forth. And what's really cool is like, that's where, I mean, it's amazing to be going around the calendar in this way with the cycle of the sun and having the moon doing its thing, reflecting that energy, because, you know, we were working through the codon ring of humanity very recently, and we're still working through the codon ring of life and death, these groupings of gene keys that have an interrelationship and together promote the movement of the evolutionary process, or the, I guess in some ways you may look at it as a mutative process. But it just feels it feels really interesting for me to follow the movement of energy to energy through these gates. You know, the last hexagram of gene key 27 is like an open mouth. There's a strong line at the top and a strong line at the bottom, and the weak lines all in between. So it just looks like a gaping mouth. And the current hexagram, that strong line at the top has sort of poofed out and moved out, and it's just one strong line at the bottom and all of the weak lines. So the progression, there's a very clear movement of energy from one into the next, and it really guides our focus if we're able to be aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost like I was looking at the hexagram with Ashley, and maybe I could even pull it up how it looks. But yeah, actually let's us so people can see it.
Yeah.
Because it feels like maybe this fear of kind of falling in. And that's exactly, what actually, let's go on the normal Gene Key website. Gene Keys. And I feel like that's where the addictive tendencies come from if we look at this at this hexagram. So let's see. Yeah, there are some gaps when we don't speak today. That's perfect for the 20. So actually we don't see it maybe super well because we have this little thing here, but all these 5 on the top are open, and then we see the closed one on the bottom. And it's almost like what we are doing, we're kind of afraid of falling into a gap because we don't know what's going to happen if everything becomes stillness and silence. So we create all these patterns up here that takes us out from that. It maybe feels like anxiety we're going to fall into a gap. And then we create all these addictive patterns where we feel like we have those crutches that hold us in to a place that is more safe and more, something we know. But actually it's really down here. And like, new life springs forward from the depth, receiving awakening from within. So really, like when we come home, that the true stillness comes from within when we just dare to stay with it long enough. And that is the turning point, when we dare to feel into the body, when we dare to feel even the agitation, because when we feel it, we can allow it to transform, to dissipate too.
Yeah, so that really, that really speaks to the basis of addiction and what it is and how it arises in our experience. I've seen a huge amount of discussion around addiction recently, on social media and other platforms, of what it is and where it comes from. And perhaps this is a response to my own social conditioning. I grew up in the 1980s when the war on drugs was raging strongly, and the idea of addiction as being this sort of heinous monster that takes over a person's life and destroys it from the inside out. It just, it creates this idea of fear around the patterning of addiction. But when we see it through the lens of the gene keys, addiction simply becomes a universal pattern, not one that's unique to a person who made bad choices in their life or something. It identifies the energy structure of how an addiction actually functions, which is that when we have presence with the discomfort of suffering, we do our best to receive some relief or some form of suspending the consequences of that suffering for a period of time by imposing another behavior or activity pattern. And whatever that pattern is that we use to receive relief, we can become addicted to that pattern, because what we're trying to achieve is peacefulness. But we're not willing to walk through the discomfort of the suffering to the other side where that peacefulness actually is. And Bella, I don't know if you want to share that picture again of the hexagram, but I imagine a person kind of standing on the edge of this giant pit and kind of like falling, falling down through towards the bottom, and the discomfort of the experience that would be of falling towards this. There's going to be you're going to hit the bottom, at some point you're going to hit it. You don't know when or how far down it is, but it's coming and you're headed right for it. That discomfort, if you can just let go, you'll find that space of peace within there. But when you're in the midst of that fall, if you impose this other pattern, you've now set up the possibility to become addicted to the relief pattern. So whether the pattern is a substance that you take into your body, or it's a behavior that you engage in, it really doesn't matter what it is. Any pattern can become an addictive pattern. Even pathways of thought can be addictive, to something people are often calling out today is spiritual bypassing. That can be an addictive behavior, because without conscious awareness, you're just trying to superimpose this pattern of positivity to distract from the discomfort of the suffering that's present.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's another thing I feel that maybe could be interesting to just look at when it comes to movement and actually, let me just movement and process in the body. So there is something where we are, I guess it's about what's your truth. And let's see if I can move this. I have okay, that's better. So there is something right now, and I think we have, we have had Pluto in the 61, psychosis, inspiration, and sanctity for a very long time. And now it has been moving forward. So it's in the 60, but it's going to go retrograde, I think, or actually maybe went retrograde a few days ago already, and it might go back. But the fact that there has been, this is where the great conjunction was as well earlier, for the last year, we've had all these gates, Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto and everything kind of meeting here in the psychosis. And what I feel with the 24 is that if we look at kind of the process of bringing in inspiration, the 61 is all about your inner truth or the great mystery. So it's very far away from the collective ego. The collective ego or the individual ego is, is the little I, is the narrow way. But the inspiration of the 61 comes from a place that is pure, we could say. So it might either it's your inner truth, or it's the great mystery of of truth. And we do speak about inner knowing, or truth. And this is what the 24 can receive, because the process is inspiration that is not colored by the confusion and the doubt and the psychosis of the human mind, of the human ego. That comes in, and the recipient, or the receiver of that is the 24. And maybe it has to kind of return home before it can really decipher what is that inspiration, what is that truth that comes through, can be so big. So the human mind, the 24, is kind of coming home in order to decipher that inspiration, so it can be, kind of taken care of in a human life, in a human body. That's why we call it the inventor, taking that inner truth, that ultimate truth, that great mystery, and bring it into human form. And then the process continues into the 43. That is about when the penny drops, that kind of insight. And we speak about the 23 as the translator of that. So, and we can see then we have the 8 that is the agent, and the 1 that is the creative expression. So there is something powerful here, of how an inspiration comes through and how we do the best of it. But it can also kind of like, be a glitch. So instead of using that inspiration, the psychosis and the doubt and the confusion might come in and go over and over and over. And that is what creates those also on the outer, like how do we bring it out in the world? Well, it does create, does create a kind of deafness in the 43, because we kind of can't hear. It is like we can't hear when we are just going over things in a way that isn't even constructive. There is a complexity created in the 23. There is a mediocrity in the way this is expressed in the world, and even a depression, so there is something very powerful here when things come in the middle of the chart, and knowing that this is individual circuitry. So this is a process in each and every human that is unique, where we are taking inspiration in a different way, that our tendencies of what we do with that inspiration is also very unique and individual. So that felt important, and somehow maybe also with both the sun and Uranus. Like right now, it's maybe a very good time to not have just the same tracks of the way that we deal with these things that come in, but actually be a bit outside the box in the way that we deal with inspirations, in the way how we think, in the way how we interact in those patterns.
Yeah, while you were speaking, it was making me think of how collectively we often have related to the creative geniuses that we see as artists in our experience. And whether you're looking at the painter Vincent van Gogh, who clearly suffered from some form of psychosis, or you look at any number of 20th century pop stars, musicians, artists who have suffered from any number of addictions, often to some form of opioid, painkiller, or other form of substance that will kind of like numb them out from the intensity of that creative drive that they're working with. And when you're looking at that pathway that goes straight down the system, obviously the human design system is a model that is made in conjunction with all of these cosmic and environmental forces that are going on. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily translate directly through our body in the same, like our physical body in the exact same way, but in that human design system, you can see that straight line, and it perfectly describes the process of creative expression. And whether you see yourself as an artist or completely having no creative ability whatsoever, the process of life that is coming through you is in itself that inspirational process that is happening through that channel. And when, for instance, right now we're looking at this gate, gene key 24. This is a big opportunity to recalibrate our energetic systems to be in a frequency that allows for the passage of that energy through our system in the most resonant way for the truth of who we really are, rather than to impose these shadow frequency patterns at a certain point in this process, which is going to finish itself out regardless of what we do. We cannot do something that's going to turn off this flow of creative life coming in and through us. It's going to happen. The question is, how do we want to experience that? How do we want to express that? How do we want it to manifest into the world? And so when we're looking at this tendency, this universal tendency of humanity to impose certain patterns to find relief from the discomfort of suffering, we have an opportunity to shift our energetic creative patterns so that we allow for the movement of that life process, and also by consequence allow for our experiencing of the discomfort. And it's one of those moments where, whenever a lot of people talk about going on a spiritual journey, and they talk about like doing the dark night of the soul like it's a rite of passage. Like, in order to spiritually evolve, you have to go through this hellish period of your life where everything falls apart and everything's just terrible and you feel awful the whole time. And a lot of people are able to engage or relate with that possibility as this kind of like positive notion, like, oh yeah, I'm going to the dark night of the soul. It's a good thing because I'm going to come out the other side and I'm going to be love and light and rainbows and stars and sparkles and all that stuff. And when we relate to that process in that way, we're actually inhibiting the movement of that energetic process from freely flowing. When we're even looking to the future, I'm going to suffer this, I'm going to go through this suffering so that I'm a much better person in the future. Even a pattern like that is an addictive pattern. It's a false pattern that we've imposed to kind of steel ourselves up to go through the discomfort. But when discomfort is present, a true acceptance doesn't look to the future. That stillness doesn't say, oh, if I just can make it through this, I'll be better someday. It just sits with it in silence. And that's where I feel like the magic of this particular gene key really lies, is its ability to give us like the key to how to suffer as a human being. And I know that, that sounds silly kind of coming out of my mouth, even to me, but it feels like a very important process for us to master, because we're not going to get out of this life alive. And that means that one way or another, there's going to be suffering. And if we can tap into that way where that life force is encouraged or is uninhibited, then that freedom, that channel that Bella was talking about, can be a free flowing of the light of your life into the world, which then sort of ironically produces that shiny the world is beautiful and everything is wonderful type of an experience.
Yeah. I just, right now we have the sun right in Taurus and we have the earth in Scorpio. So I feel like there is something, when you speak about the dark night of the soul, when people can like speak about it in that way, I don't actually think it's that transformational. I don't even think it's the dark night of the soul, because the dark night of the soul is like, it's about just kind of getting through the next moment. And it's, yeah, if it's a true, if it's a true spiritual transformation, it's not really about thinking about what comes after, because you're so in totality absorbed by the moment. So that's, so yeah, just by the way that that conversation would go, you would kind of know that it's more bypassing, it feels like. Then, not to say that all spiritual transformations are super hard, but yeah, they're really where, with the Scorpio energy here as well, I feel like one concept of it to think of it too is that Taurus is a bit stubborn and a bit comfortable with thinking and doing the way that is always done. It's gonna, walk the same way, walk the same path to go and eat the grass, and then walk the same path home. It's very hard to change the pattern of how the cow is gonna do its thing. And then Scorpio actually comes there and kind of balances the polarity point of the wheel and says, some things are going to have to die, and it's not going to be comfortable. And you're not in that moment, you're going to be absorbed in that pain, in that death. And there is a rebirth, but you can't, like, it doesn't really, there's no sense in thinking about a rebirth as you're dying. Like, then you're escaping again. It's another pattern. So yeah, just kind of thinking about, what you were saying in terms of the astrological sign, and that
Mm,
tendency for this archetype, the inventor, to kind of be in the Taurus energy. But there we have the earth on the other side that says, remember the purpose, remember that there is like a fractal pattern here. There's something more beautiful than your racks in your brain that always take the same tracks, that everything always the same pattern. So I feel on the other side, in that 44 that's there, we speak about it as, the soul fractals, so the fractal patterns that are the true wisdom and beauty of the formation, whether we're looking at the flower or a brain or a group of people. So knowing that there is a geometry that has an inherent beauty, and that, yeah, it's beyond the human mind a million times.
mm. Yeah, it's just that reminded me of how Richard Rudd has pointed out in some of his writings about how the spiritual process in and of itself can be its own trap. It can prevent you from your own evolution by focusing on the process and trying to understand the outcomes and control what experiences you're going to have along the way. Um, yeah, it's really phenomenal how all of these various influences kind of allow us to focus in on to these elements of experience that are so universal and can give us a platform to kind of integrate our relationship that we've developed with those processes. And you know, in that in those moments where we're really facing something that is pushing us, whether from the Scorpio it's a symbolic death of a phase of life, a relationship, a job, a location that you've been living. When things start to fall apart, understanding how to create a relationship with the experience that is happening without kind of pouring fuel onto the flames of suffering. It's really pretty incredible. Um, I want to say to those of you watching on Facebook, um, if you had a chance to check out the Super Pink Moon Lunar Alchemy session we did yesterday, we did offer a free potent transmission that that helps to alchemize the shadow frequencies of the 27th gene key, and has the possibility of transforming how energy flows through your system. So if you'd like an experience of that, you can check it out on Unlock Your Design, or message one of us if you need a link to figure out where that video exists. However, now we're going to continue on with our solar members and finish up our discussion, look at any questions that anyone has, and we'll move into the portion of the quantum healing with Lunar Alchemy that does provide that. If you're interested in joining this weekly process of moving through the gates of Lunar Alchemy, where we pretty much are looking at every gate as the sun moves through it. And with the full moons and the new moons, we often have special sessions to make sure that we catch each one of these movements so that your full system can receive that transformational potential. We'll post a link on how to join that in the comments. So thanks to you for joining us. We'll go ahead and